The canister was already warm when I lifted it from the rack. That was the first thing I noticed. Not heat from the archive's climate coils, which run cold by design, but something else, a temperature that should not have been there. I set it on the survey table and did not open it for a long time. I am Veth Oranis. I have kept the Kelrath Mapping Conclave's deep archive for 38 years. Before me, archivist Solon Drev kept it for 22. Before him, a woman named Orvath Mess kept it for 41. The canisters in this vault go back further than any of us. Ceramic sealed, sigil locked, filed in racks that descend 3 sublevels below the conclave's working floors. Most of them are routine, star density surveys, corridor depth readings, boundary confirmation runs, ordinary work. The galaxy is vast, and most of it is simply itself, quietly and without drama, and the charts we make of it are clean and cold and exact. Most of them. The route application had come in that morning from a conclave-sponsored team. 4 surveyors, a junior cartographer, a pilot with 17 deep-run years on her record. Good people. Thorough. They had filed the application in proper form, cited the correct survey gaps, attached a funding authorization from the conclave's Outer Reaches Committee. Everything in order. Their proposed route took them through the Veth Null 7 approach corridor, skirting the edge of what every working atlas in the conclave, and in every other mapping body in the known sectors, marks as a blank. Not unmapped. Blank. There is a difference. Unmapped means the survey has not been run. Blank means the surveys have been run, and the sector has chosen not to appear on them. I had the authority to deny the application without explanation. I had done it once before, 12 years ago, for a different team with a similar route. That team had filed a formal complaint. The complaint had been reviewed by the conclave's board of directors and quietly dismissed. I did not know, at that time, why my predecessor had sealed the canister, or what was in it. I had only the notation he left on the outer label, written in his careful angular hand, "Do not refile. Archive only. Veth Null 7. I had assumed it was a failed survey, equipment loss, a navigation error that had consumed the funding and returned nothing usable. It happens. The outer sectors are not always cooperative. Then the new application came in, and I held the denial form in my hands, and I understood that I was going to have to know the reason before I could stand behind the decision one more time. I broke Solon Drev's sigil with my own seal cutter. The canister was warm against my palms. Inside, not a map. 12 nested data cores, each sealed independently, each labeled with a survey team designation and a date. The oldest was 211 years back. A conclave-era team called the Veth Null Primary Survey. 4 members, well-equipped for the period. The most recent was dated 46 years ago, 3 years before Solon Drev retired and left me this vault. I read them in order. That was probably a mistake. The Veth Null Primary Survey had entered the sector from the Orvath approach, a vector that no longer exists on any chart because the approach corridor itself was quietly removed from the working atlas sometime in the following century, a fact I had never registered as deliberate until now. Their first week of logs was routine, standard stellar density, 2 gas giants, a dust field of moderate depth, professional, unhurried, the kind of notation I recognize from my own early survey runs. Then, at day 9, the log entries begin to change. Not dramatically. That is the thing that stays with me. Not panic, not a crisis. Simply, shorter. The entries grow shorter. The observations begin to drop detail they should be tracking. By day 12, the log is recording position data and nothing else. By day 14, it is recording position data that does not change. The team went quiet on day 15. No distress signal. No final transmission. Position data frozen on the last recorded coordinates, deep inside the blank. I set that core aside and opened the second one. The Kelrath Independent Survey Group. A century later. 6 surveyors, better equipment, a dedicated communications relay they had anchored at the sector boundary before entering. Careful people who had clearly read something in the conclave's public archive that made them want the relay. Their logs ran to day 18 before the entries began to shorten. The communications relay transmitted their position data for 4 more days after the log entries stopped. Then the relay itself went quiet. The last automated ping from the relay had returned an error code that the independent survey group's own communications engineer had apparently not seen before and had annotated in the margin of the relay's specification file 3 days before entering the sector. Return signal modified, origin unconfirmed. She had not reported this finding to the conclave. I do not know why. I have spent a long time since that night trying not to speculate about why. I read all 12 cores. It took most of the night. The pattern is the same across 200 years and 12 survey teams. Entry, routine observation, a shortening of entries that is gradual enough that no single log reads as alarming, a cessation of entries, a silence. No debris has ever been recovered from the blank sector. No equipment, no hull fragments, no remains. The sector's return log is an empty column in a database that has been quietly maintained, I now understand, by a succession of archivists who each opened the canister once and then sealed it again and said nothing. There are variations within the pattern that I have spent considerable time since then wishing I had not noticed. The fifth team, a conclave-chartered run from 130 years ago, well-funded, 6 members, went silent on day 11, which is consistent with the others. But 2 days before their final log entry, one of the surveyors filed a personal notation into the core, separate from the official log. The notation is addressed to no one. It reads, in its entirety, "The instruments are correct. That is the problem with the instruments. They are reading correctly. I do not know what the surveyor meant. I have read that line many times. I remain certain that she knew exactly what she meant and chose these words with great care." The ninth team sent one transmission back to their anchor relay before their log entries shortened. A voice transmission, which is unusual. Survey teams in deep runs communicate almost exclusively by data packet. The relay's automated transcription system rendered the transmission as 41 seconds of static, followed by a single spoken phrase. The phrase, as transcribed, reads, "It has been here longer than the stars." The relay log notes that the transmission origin coordinates match the team's last confirmed position. The relay log also notes that the voice pattern did not match any registered crew member's vocal print. The conclave's communications archive has flagged this discrepancy for 40 years without resolution. I suspect it will remain flagged. Solendrev's own annotation is in the 10th data core, not as a survey log but as a personal note, filed into the canister after the fact. He had apparently opened the canister when he was newly appointed, as I had done tonight, and had read the first 6 cores and then stopped. He had not read the 7th through 12th. I do not blame him. His note is 4 sentences. The last one reads, "I have left the remaining cores sealed. I believe the answer is in them. I also believe the answer is not one this conclave is equipped to act on, and that the appropriate response to an answer one cannot act on is to ensure no further teams are sent to retrieve it in person." He was correct. I read the remaining 6 cores. I wish, in some ways, that I had stopped at 6 as he did. The 12th team, the last one, 46 years ago, was a 2-person scout run, unauthorized, filed under a different project designation to avoid triggering the quiet hold that had by then accumulated on the Veth 07 approach. They had apparently found a reference to the blank in an old conclave budget report and had decided the absence of recent survey data meant the sector was simply due for a revisit. They were young. They were thorough in the way young cartographers are thorough, which is to say completely, without the particular caution that comes from having read the things that other thorough young cartographers found and then went quiet about. Their log runs to day 6. The entries shorten on day 4. On day 5, 1 entry. Position confirmed. Instruments nominal. No anomaly detected. On day 6, 1 entry. We are being read. That is the complete text of the final log entry from the 12th survey team to enter the blank sector of Veth 07. 3 words and a period, filed at the standard logging interval, as though it were a routine notation. Position data continued transmitting for 11 more hours after that entry. Then nothing. I sat in the archive vault for a long time after I closed the 12th core. I am a cartographer. I deal in what is measurable, what is recordable, what can be rendered in the clean geometry of a star chart. I do not deal in the kind of knowledge that sits in your hands like warmth that has no source. but I have read enough surveys to know what a measured result looks like, and I have read enough of the human sectors surrounding data, the approach corridors quietly removed, the relay errors never reported, the way the blank on every atlas in the known sectors is the same shape, the same depth, the same careful blankness, to understand that this is not an absence of data. What it is, I wrote in the margin of my personal survey log that night, is a response. The known sectors have been expanding outward from their original charted cores for 400 years. In that time, our survey teams have entered regions of stellar debris, regions of high radiation, regions of navigational anomaly, regions of total darkness, where stars should have been. In every case, we brought back data. Equipment failed, teams were lost, surveys came back incomplete. But we brought back data of some kind, because the sectors we entered were simply themselves, and being simply themselves, they returned our instruments' questions with answers. VETH 07 does not return answers. It reads the questions. I filed the route application denial before the conclave's morning session opened. I listed the grounds as active survey hazard, pending boundary reassessment. I did not elaborate. The junior cartographer on the application team sent me a polite follow-up inquiry 2 days later, asking if I could specify the nature of the hazard, so the team could consider alternate routing. I sent her a single-line reply. The hazard is the approach. She did not follow up again. I spent the next month redrawing the VETH 07 boundary on the conclave's master atlas. Not a small adjustment. I pushed every approach corridor back by 40 light-years, reclassified 3 adjacent sectors as restricted access pending review, and added a standing interdiction notice that would require conclave board authorization to override, rather than simply archivist sign-off. I filed the revised chart without explanation in the body of the filing. The board approved it in the quarterly review without comment. I do not know if anyone read it closely. I chose not to find out. Then, I resealed the canister. I used Solondrev's notation as the outer label again, because his words were still correct, and because I did not want to add my own name to the thing. I added 1 line below his, as he had added 1 line below the archivist before him. I do not know what the notation looked like when the VETH 0 primary survey team first sealed these records, 211 years ago, because the oldest label has been overwritten so many times that only faint impressions remain beneath the current layer of seal wax. What I can tell you is what I wrote. 7 words. The same 7 words I later found, searching backward through the conclave's own internal routing records, annotated in the margin of an approach corridor removal order from 160 years ago, in the hand of an archivist whose name I did not recognize. Which means she left them before I did, and before Solondrev did, and before the archivist before him, which means someone understood this, in writing, in 7 words, over a century and a half ago, and the conclave filed the notation and removed the corridor and did not ask why. I find that neither comforting nor disturbing. It simply is what it is, in the way that a blank sector on a chart simply is what it is, a fact, a measurement, a result. The canister is back on the rack in the sub-level archive. It is warm again. I notice this each time I pass the rack on my rounds, and I do not touch it, and I do not open it, and I do not say the 7 words to anyone, and I do not explain to the conclave's newer cartographers why the VETH 07 boundary sits where it sits, and why it will not be moved again. Some things the chart records honestly, some things the chart records by not recording them. I have been a cartographer for 38 years. I know the difference. I have decided, in the end, that the appropriate annotation for the blank is no annotation at all. The sector does not need one. It already knows we read it.